I thought originally that I was marrying a school teacher, and I just saw how other families like that lived, and I didn't ever expect to be doing anything out of the home, maybe being active in Sunday school and church and some things like that, but never dreamed that I would evolve into a nursing home administrator or anything like that.
Mother supported and the idea that the best thing that we can do, the greatest benefit of assisted living and personal care is socialization. She realized that people making new friendships and when they come to Country Meadows is a highlight of their lives.
Mrs. Leader started working with Governor from day one as an administrator with no experience. And they saw what they could do and they did it. And others would have just said, you can't do that. But they never let that stop them.
In the days when Dad was running Leader Nursing and Rehabilitation Centers, he needed a nursing home administrator at our very first community, which was located in Yeadon, outside of southwest of Philadelphia. Mother had no experience as a nursing home administrator, but when he needed this person, he knew he could trust her, he knew that she had great judgment, and she loved people. She became a nursing home administrator right off the bat, and that led to some of those dinner time conversations about, well, what do I do now, George? And he would help her work through the problems. But she was an amazing person, a great mom, a loving mom.
My grandfather really had the bold vision and had the bold ideas, was always thinking outside the box. My mom says my grandfather would do the broad strokes and my grandmother would fill in the fine details.
And I know that she was the calming force and the patient one of the relationship. And when my grandpa could be a little bit impulsive and a little bit too eager to jump onto a new idea, she was the one who would kind of rein him in and tell him, well, let's think about this. Let's consider this.
She was a very quiet but powerful influence, in my opinion, and helped to shape Country Meadows culture as much as my father did. I truly believe that in a different way.
She used to say that she wants our residents to feel proud about where they live so that they can entertain their family and friends there with pride and not be ashamed of having lived in a personal care home or wherever they're an assisted living community.
I believe that Mrs. Leader's vision of our community continues. It's warm and inviting, and that was what she always, I believe, strived to create, and it continues that home-like feeling that you get when you walk into a Country Meadows community.
Mrs. Leader, if you look up the word lady in the dictionary, her picture should be there. She was quite the lady. She really instilled in all of us, I think, to be kind and do kind acts, as much as we can, because it not only impacts the individual that you're doing a kind act for, it impacts a lot of people, because if they see it, then they feel it as well. They might not be the recipient of it, but they still can feel that goodness or the kindness coming from somebody else.
And she would really like to get to know you personally. So Mrs. Leader became not only my boss, but much of a mentor to me.
This is a mission, a family mission. It was a family mission for Mother and Dad, and they loved the opportunity to go out and visit the campus, to drive out. One of the things that Dad would do sometimes on the weekends is just drive out to one of the campuses, walk through it, talk to residents, talk to coworkers, sometimes stay for lunch, and drive home.
She supported people in very private, quiet ways. She wasn't looking for attention in it, but it was always about how grateful she felt for all the blessings in her own life and how she wanted to share that with others.
She really helped to make sure that we weren't trying to become the Ritz-Carlton, and we weren't trying to become institutional and feel that we really wanted to maintain a feeling that could be in the den or family room or living room of any nice home.
And they treated everybody the same way. And the joke I used to always say is that She's not going to pass go. She's not going to collect $200. She's going directly to heaven. And I know that's the case, so.
One of my favorite phrases or leaderisms maybe was he would sometimes lean back in his chair and say, she could charm the birds out of the trees. And I believe that that described a lot of the way he felt about Mary Jane.
Grace is a good word for Mrs. Leader because she was always very graceful, gracious, kind, considerate, and always thanked everybody for what they did.
She was graciously and full of grace.
Really the most gracious person you'd ever want to meet.
I would say the one word that would define her would be grace. Is the word that always comes to mind.
My grandmother was one of the most gracious, kind, ladylike, and just inwardly and outwardly beautiful people that I've had the pleasure to have in my life. And she was all about relationships, about treating other people kindly, about being thoughtful, and about putting other people first.
She was just a very, very gracious woman, and always a compliment for everyone she met.
A first-class lady. She was, when I was a little girl, she was always the person that I aspired to be.
Beautiful woman. I mean, beautiful, kind, considerate, but she also spoke her mind. She spoke the truth. You knew that when Mrs. Leader spoke to you, she wasn't just saying something for the sake of saying something.
Mrs. Leader, to me, was a beautiful person inside and out.
Funniest thing she used to do was he was a great public speaker, and we used to all love to watch him speak in any kind of forum. And she would often be in the first row, being with him, and we would see her once in a while go like this. And that meant, you've spoken enough now, George. Time to get on to the next agenda item. And that was her classic way to stop him.
Yeah, she would say, George, or all you'd see every once in a while would be a finger coming up, or she'd get stuck on that. And then he would take a different path.
All she had to do was say, George, and he knew. He knew that was when to be quiet. He knew that was when to stop doing whatever he was doing. She didn't have to say much.
I don't think in all the years that I knew them, I ever heard her raise her voice to him or anything. It was always just that George, you know, and then she just kind of said, and he usually listened.
I do remember many times Mrs. Leader saying, "Oh, George." So I wonder how many times in her life she said, "Oh, George."
And he would talk and keep going on, and she would say, George, now I think we've heard enough. George, I think it's time to stop. I think it's time to sit down.
She would say, "Oh, George, just let him go. Today's his day off." And it was, "Oh, George," you know.
She had a carousel at her farm, and typical of her, she said, you know, I don't really need a lot of jewelry, and I don't need fancy clothing, and I don't have to drive a fancy car, but I love my carousel. And she said, that's my Jaguar.
My mother would invite residents to her home, very often in groups that came by bus, and host them for an afternoon and spend time talking with each and every resident. But it was very much my mother's talent at putting people at ease and being a hostess who offered that kind of hospitality. She always reminded us that the people that were residents at Country Meadows were just like a part of our family and should be treated as such.
She loved her merry-go-round and always made sure that it was in top shape for anybody that wanted to come and use it. She loved to have her parties and her picnics and have everybody out there. And that was what was so neat about them. Everything that they had in their lives, they were willing to share with everybody.
Mrs. Leader reminded me of my grandmother. Loving, caring, would do anything for you. I remember one of the the picnics that we had out there, and a storm was coming up, one of the company picnics. And long story short, there was 20 people that she invited in her house, and like 15 kids were on her bed, and she was telling stories, and really, really neat.
She loved having the ability to share her farm with other people, and she always was present at the picnics, and she always played the gracious hostess, and truly enjoyed seeing them go on hay rides and ride on her carousel.
God, stop making people like that, you know? Kind of like our antiques, you know? Just, they're one of a kind.